scheme where we can offer compensation to people, but the problem is that slum dwellers, in order to get compensation, have to prove that they were residents. Now there's a difficulty with that, because a slum dweller doesn't have any kind of sort of checks that they've given to the landlord. They don't have any record of rental payments, and nor have they paid any electricity bills or water bills or anything. So they don't get anything necessarily unless they really fight for it. And it went to the Supreme Court of India, and that Supreme Court, having gone nice neoliberal, said, we cannot give any compensation to slum dwellers who cannot prove their residency, because to do so will be the equivalent of rewarding a pickpocket for his actions. So, bit by bit, there's an attack upon Harvey. Now, this can be done other ways, of course. How did all the property developers in Seoul get hold of all of those properties which were on those hillsides, which are now covered with high-rises? I was there in the 1990s, and the developers and construction companies had hired these big sumi-wrestler characters to go in there and just throw people out of there and smash up their houses with sledgehammers. And you could walk over whole hillsides that were completely smashed, just to make way for the developers and the construction interests. It was appalling. Violent. In the United States we use eminent domain. The other way to do it is what's going on in the favelas of Brazil, the favelas of Rio. It'd be very hard to send people in there. Too many armed gangs in there to sort of go in there with the military apparatus and doing it, although they're trying to do it that way a bit. The best way, they figure, is to say, let's give everybody private property rights. Sounds very progressive, right? Except there's always one thing, that is, poor people will always give up their property rights at a very, very low price when they're in an emergency. Rich people won't do it at all. So what you would do in the favela is you find somebody who is really financially stressed, and you say, all right, I'll give you $1,000 for your... Oh, what a lot of money. This is what happened to social housing in Britain. Margaret Thatcher said, okay, poor people can become homeowners. Now you cannot find any low-income housing anywhere within the central London area at all. Working people have to travel in hours to get into the city. Same thing has happened in Manhattan. So step by step, Manhattan has been turned into some vast gated community in which even people like me can barely afford to live. And the result of that is that the working people in Manhattan now have to commute in for an hour, hour and a half, from way, way out in the periphery. This is no lifestyle. This is the kind of thing that the Right to the City movement wants to redress. That is, we want to take back the city from the developers and the financiers. We want to take back the city from a lot of hangers-on, the bureaucrats, and we've got to take it back from the academics. I'm sorry. A lot of academics do not take these things seriously, and are not prepared necessarily to speak out on these matters. But taking back the right to the city is absolutely a crucial moment. And I was very encouraged in this when I was down in Mexico City, another place where there's a huge building boom and incredible impoverishment. And since neoliberalization has come along, Mexico has more billionaires than almost anywhere else. It's got 14, I think, on the world's wealthiest list. And the wealthiest man in the world is now Carlos Slim, a Mexican. So there you have incredible concentrations of wealth and incredible impoverishment. And what does Carlos Slim do? He takes over the centre of the city and puts cobblestones all over the centre of the city, just in the area he likes to be, so that you can be in a nice cobblestone area. So this is, if you like, the situation in Mexico City. And I was there at a conference, and the conference was partly geared to a commemoration of the massacre of the students in 1968 in a place called the Plaza de las Tres Culturas. And as the conference went on, I strolled out into the plaza, and the population had strung up a huge banner. And I was very touched by this banner. Translated, it said, "Change the world," said Marx. "Change life," said Rimbaud. "For us," said André Breton, "these two tasks are identical." It's a great thought. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for bringing us back to the roots. But on the other hand, you also challenge me. Going on quoting Marx, so the philosophers always explain the world, but we have to change it. How to change it?
There are various elements. The social movements are crucial. There are multiple social movements around the world, some of them gathering around things like the World Social Forum, the anti-globalization movement, and so on. But there's a lot of serious, when I go back to those 6 elements, there are a lot of serious questions about the mental conceptions of the world which are embodied in those movements. From my perspective, I think too many of them have been dominated by the idea of local action is all that matters and you don't have to put it together. Whereas I think the Right to the City group has a very clear understanding that they need not to bury their differences, because their differences are terribly important to them, but to enter into alliances with others so that they cannot go it alone. And this also requires a great deal of theoretical work on the part of academics, students, who have always been important in revolutionary movements. And I think if you take the view that Lefebvre took back in the 60s, which is to say that revolution has to be urban or it's nothing at all, then the urban is, if you like, one of the big places we have to start. And it is through interpretive activity, engagement, that we work through a much larger social movement that we now have, a political movement. And we have to be prepared to do the job of organizing, entering into alliances, working with groups. That's where you go.
As architects, we are busy with classical instruments. For example, social housing, urban renewal, and those activities to provide the low-income classes with shelter. But under the conditions of globalization, the competition can to another level, to another scale. That makes it, for us, in the moment, so difficult to think about changes.
Well, you are subject to the coercive laws of competition, as is everybody else. And that does indeed create some problems. But for me, also one of the central issues, and it goes back, if you like, to a foundational argument in Marx, that the issue in the end is going to be who produces the surplus products and who controls them. And it is therefore, the future is going to depend heavily on the solution of that problem. And that is important for a number of reasons. You see, historically, with the exception of those periods of crises like the 1930s, capitalism has grown at a compound rate of 2 to 3, sometimes 4% a year. Now, when you grow at 2 to 3 or 4% a year and your 40 square mile area around Manchester, that's one thing. When you look at the situation right now, and you look at China, India, Brazil, Philippines, Thailand, as well as, Japan and South Korea and increasingly Russia, and say, all of this is going to grow at 2 to 3%